Flight was forced to make an emergency landing after one of its engines caught fire. A witness shot video capturing the moment.
A routine morning flight became every passenger's worst nightmare when flames shot out of an engine at 8,000 feet above Los Angeles. What happened next shocked the entire aviation world and forced authorities to take action that nobody saw coming. Could this terrifying incident have been prevented? And what does it mean for air travel safety across America? Let's start where it all began, when morning routines turned deadly. The sun was rising over Los Angeles International Airport on what appeared to be just another busy Tuesday morning. Thousands of travelers rushed through security checkpoints, clutching coffee cups and dragging suitcases behind them. TSA agents processed the endless stream of passengers with practiced efficiency, their X-ray machines humming constantly as laptops and shoes moved through the scanners. Nobody knew that within hours, this ordinary day would become one of the most dramatic incidents in aviation history. Flight 1457, a Boeing 737 bound for Chicago, sat peacefully at Gate 42. The aircraft had passed all routine safety checks just hours earlier, with maintenance crews giving it a clean bill of health. Captain Martinez, a veteran pilot with over 20 years of experience and more than 15,000 flight hours, reviewed his flight plans while sipping his morning coffee. His co-pilot, Sarah Chen, ran through the standard pre-flight checklist with the same calm precision she had done hundreds of times before. Both pilots had excellent safety records and had never experienced a serious emergency during their careers. Inside the terminal, families said their goodbyes. Business travelers typed frantically on laptops, trying to finish last-minute emails before boarding. A group of college students heading home for spring break chatted excitedly about their plans, completely unaware of the drama that was about to unfold. Children pressed their faces against the massive windows, watching planes taxi across the runway with wide-eyed wonder. Airport workers moved efficiently through their morning routines, restocking shops, cleaning floors, and preparing for another day of managing one of the world's busiest transportation hubs. Everything felt normal, routine, safe. On the tarmac, ground crews loaded luggage and performed their final inspections with methodical precision. The Boeing 737's engines gleamed under the California sunshine, their polished surfaces reflecting the early morning light. The fuel tanks were full. Weather conditions were nearly perfect with clear skies and minimal wind, and all electronic systems showed green across the board. Baggage handlers worked quickly to load the final suitcases, while catering trucks delivered meals and beverages for the cross-country flight. But hidden deep within the starboard engine, invisible to even the most experienced technicians, a tiny metal fatigue crack was growing larger with each passing minute. The maintenance log showed nothing unusual. The previous flight had been smooth, with no reported problems. The engine had been serviced just 2 weeks earlier by certified technicians who found no signs of trouble. What nobody realized was that this seemingly perfect morning was about to spiral into chaos that would reach all the way to the White House. The point of no return. At exactly 8:47 a.m., Flight 1457 received clearance for takeoff. The 156 passengers on board settled into their seats, most of them completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Some were heading home after business trips. Others were starting vacations they had planned for months. The Boeing 737 accelerated down runway 25R, its engines roaring with power. Captain Martinez pulled back on the controls, and the aircraft lifted gracefully into the bright morning sky. Los Angeles sprawled beneath them as they climbed toward their cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. For the first few minutes, everything seemed perfect. The plane climbed steadily. Air traffic control guided them smoothly through the busy Los Angeles airspace, and passengers began to relax. Flight attendant Jennifer Walsh started preparing for the beverage service, chatting with her colleagues about their weekend plans. But at 8,000 feet, something went terribly wrong. A passenger in seat 14F, sitting directly over the right wing, noticed something odd. A small stream of what looked like smoke was trailing from the engine. He blinked, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him, but the smoke was getting thicker, and now other passengers were starting to notice too. In the cockpit, Captain Martinez heard a sound that every pilot dreads, a low grinding noise coming from the starboard engine. He immediately checked his instruments, but everything still looked normal. The engine temperature was within acceptable limits, oil pressure was good, and all warning lights remained off. Then, without warning, the entire aircraft shuddered violently. The grinding noise became a harsh screeching sound, like metal tearing apart. Warning alarms started blaring in the cockpit as the engine temperature spiked dangerously high. Captain Martinez's years of training kicked in instantly. He reduced power to the failing engine while his co-pilot began running through emergency procedures. The passengers could feel that something was very wrong. The plane began vibrating so intensely that overhead bins started rattling open. Flight attendant Jennifer Walsh grabbed the intercom, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The flight attendant announced that the captain had asked everyone to return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts immediately. Her voice carefully measured to hide any trace of alarm. In the cockpit, the situation was rapidly getting worse. The engine temperature gauge was now deep in the red zone, and Captain Martinez could see flames shooting out from the engine cowling. Pieces of metal were breaking away and flying past the cabin windows, terrifying the passengers who could see them. Co-pilot Sarah Chen immediately contacted air traffic control with the words, "Every controller fears to hear." LAX Tower, Flight 1457 declaring an emergency. "We have an engine failure and need to return immediately." The response was swift and professional. Controllers immediately cleared a path for the distressed aircraft, rerouting all other traffic away from Flight 1457's approach route. On the ground, fire trucks and ambulances began racing toward the runway, their sirens wailing across the airport. Back on the plane, passengers were experiencing pure terror. The aircraft was now flying on just one engine, making it extremely difficult to control. Captain Martinez fought to keep the plane level while dealing with the massive imbalance in thrust. The Boeing 737 was essentially trying to fly in circles, pulled constantly toward the failed engine. Some passengers began crying. Others prayed silently or called loved ones to say goodbye. A businessman in first class recorded a video message for his family, not knowing if he would survive the next 30 minutes. Children asked their parents why the plane was shaking so much, and parents struggled to find comforting words. What none of them knew was that their crisis was about to trigger a chain of events that would involve the highest levels of government. Emergency response and political fallout. As Flight 1457 limped back toward LAX on one engine, the airport transformed into a scene of organized chaos. Emergency vehicles lined runway 25 left, their flashing lights creating a sea of red and blue across the tarmac. Firefighters in silver protective suits stood ready with foam cannons, prepared for the worst-case scenario. Airport operations immediately went into full emergency mode. All other flights were either diverted to different runways or put on hold. The terminal began buzzing with confusion as departure boards started showing delays across the board. Passengers waiting for other flights pressed against windows, watching the emergency vehicles gather on the runway. In the White House, President Trump was receiving his morning intelligence briefing when his chief of staff burst into the room with urgent news. An aide had been monitoring aviation emergency frequencies and caught wind of the developing crisis at LAX. Within minutes, the president was on a secure phone line with airport officials and the FAA. The conversation was tense. Early reports suggested that the engine failure might be related to a manufacturing defect that could affect other aircraft. If true, this meant that potentially hundreds of Boeing 737s across the country could be flying with the same hidden flaw that nearly brought down Flight 1457. President Trump's response was immediate and decisive. After consulting with aviation experts and safety officials, he made a choice that stunned everyone in the room. LAX would be temporarily shut down for a complete safety inspection of all similar aircraft. Captain Martinez lined up Flight 1457 for what would be one of the most challenging landings of his career. With only one functioning engine, every aspect of the approach had to be perfect. Too fast, and they might overshoot the runway. Too slow, and the aircraft could stall and crash. Fire trucks raced alongside the runway as the Boeing 737 descended through the morning haze. Passengers gripped their armrests, following the flight attendant's instructions to brace for a potentially rough landing. The cabin was eerily quiet, except for the sound of the struggling single engine and the whispered prayers of frightened travelers. As the wheels touched down on runway 25 left, the aircraft bounced once, then settled onto the tarmac with a jarring thud. Captain Martinez applied maximum braking while fighting to keep the plane straight. Smoke poured from the overheated brakes as the Boeing 737 finally rolled to a stop about halfway down the runway. Emergency crews immediately surrounded the aircraft, spraying foam on the still smoking engine to prevent any chance of fire. The evacuation began instantly, with passengers sliding down emergency chutes onto the tarmac. Many were shaking, some were crying, but remarkably, everyone survived with only minor injuries. The relief was overwhelming, but the investigation was just beginning.
Adding that the remaining pilot and flight crew also said that they didn't know what was happening. It's unclear what the arrest was for, but a spokesperson for Homeland Security Investigations told our Bay Area station.
As NTSB officials cordoned off the damaged aircraft, preliminary examinations revealed something alarming. The engine failure appeared to be caused by a manufacturing defect that could potentially affect thousands of similar engines worldwide. This discovery would prompt President Trump to make an unprecedented decision that brought America's aviation system to a grinding halt. Presidential order grounds a nation. At 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time, just hours after Flight 1457's emergency landing, President Trump held an emergency press conference from the White House. Standing behind the presidential podium, he delivered news that would shock the aviation world. The president declared that the safety of American travelers was his top priority. He stated that, based on preliminary findings from the incident at Los Angeles International Airport, he was ordering an immediate temporary shutdown of LAX and a comprehensive inspection of all Boeing 737 aircraft in service across the United States.
If they're the 737 MAX, will be grounded upon landing at the destination. Pilots have been notified.
The announcement sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. LAX, one of the world's busiest airports, would be closed to all commercial traffic until further notice. The economic implications were staggering. Millions of travelers would be affected. Airlines would lose billions in revenue, and the ripple effects would be felt across the entire American economy. Critics immediately questioned whether such drastic action was necessary. Former aviation officials argued that shutting down an entire major airport based on a single incident was an overreaction. However, supporters praised the president's decisive leadership, pointing out that even a small risk of catastrophic engine failure was unacceptable when dealing with aircraft carrying hundreds of passengers. Airlines scrambled to reroute flights to nearby airports. Passengers stranded at LAX faced hours-long lines at customer service counters, desperately trying to rebook their travel plans. Social media exploded with frustrated travelers, sharing photos of packed terminals and canceled flights. As NTSB investigators worked through the night examining the wreckage of Flight 1457's engine, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The metal fatigue that caused the catastrophic failure was potentially a systematic problem affecting a specific batch of engines manufactured between 2019 and 2021. Boeing engineers were called in to assist with the investigation, and their findings were alarming. Computer models suggested that several hundred aircraft worldwide might be equipped with engines from the same production run that had caused the LAX incident. Each of these planes could potentially experience similar failures without warning. The discovery explained President Trump's swift action. Intelligence briefings had revealed that similar engine anomalies had been reported in other countries, but the information hadn't been properly shared with American aviation authorities. The Flight 1457 incident was potentially just the tip of the iceberg. FAA Administrator Mike Whitaker worked around the clock with international aviation authorities to track down every aircraft equipped with the suspect engines. The list included planes operated by major American airlines, regional carriers, and international flights that regularly used American airports. Emergency inspections began immediately at airports across the country. Maintenance crews worked in shifts, examining engines with magnifying equipment and ultrasonic testing devices. Any aircraft that showed even the slightest signs of metal fatigue was immediately grounded until the engine could be replaced. The scope of the problem was far larger than anyone had initially imagined, and the consequences would reshape aviation safety protocols for years to come. America's aviation system under stress. The closure of LAX created a domino effect across America's aviation network.
Here at LAX, yesterday 4 flights were canceled. We had some delayed as well as some diverted, and this is all because of what happened over in London. Now, I want you to take a look.
With one of the country's busiest airports suddenly offline, the remaining airports struggled to handle the overflow of diverted flights. Burbank, Long Beach, and San Diego airports were overwhelmed with aircraft that had nowhere else to land. Airlines faced their worst operational crisis in decades. Major carriers were forced to cancel hundreds of flights, not just from LAX, but from airports across the country as the ripple effect spread. Passengers found themselves stranded in cities far from their intended destinations, leading to a shortage of hotel rooms and rental cars throughout California. The economic impact was immediate and severe. Tourism officials estimated that Southern California was losing over $100 million per day in visitor spending. Business meetings were canceled, conferences were postponed, and international travelers began choosing alternative destinations rather than risk getting caught up in the aviation chaos. Despite the massive disruption, public opinion remained divided on President Trump's decision. Polls showed that while many Americans appreciated the emphasis on safety, others felt the response was disproportionate to the actual risk. Aviation experts debated whether targeted inspections would have been more appropriate than shutting down an entire major airport. International reaction was swift, with several countries temporarily banning Boeing 737s from their airspace until the investigation was complete. This global response validated President Trump's concerns and demonstrated that the problem extended far beyond American borders. Meanwhile, investigators were uncovering evidence that would change how the world viewed aviation safety forever. Deep inside Boeing's Seattle headquarters, emergency meetings continued around the clock as the company's engineers raced to understand how their engines had failed so catastrophically. What they discovered would eventually lead to one of the largest aircraft recalls in aviation history. The problem traced back to a cost-cutting measure implemented in 2019. To save money on manufacturing, Boeing had switched to a new supplier for certain engine components. While these parts met all official safety standards, they hadn't undergone the same rigorous long-term testing as the previous components. Under normal operating conditions, the new parts performed perfectly. However, when subjected to specific combinations of temperature, pressure, and vibration, conditions that occurred on less than 1% of flights, microscopic cracks could develop. Over time, these cracks grew until they reached a critical point where the entire engine component could fail without warning. The investigation revealed that Boeing's internal safety teams had actually flagged potential concerns about the new components months earlier. However, the warnings had been downplayed by executives who were under pressure to reduce costs and maintain production schedules. The decision to proceed with the questionable parts would eventually cost the company billions in lawsuits and regulatory fines. Federal prosecutors began examining whether Boeing executives had deliberately withheld safety information from regulators. The FBI seized company emails and internal documents, looking for evidence of a cover-up. Several high-ranking Boeing officials were placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. 3 weeks after Flight 1457's emergency landing, LAX finally reopened to commercial traffic. The airport had undergone the most comprehensive safety inspection in its history, with every aircraft and piece of equipment thoroughly examined by teams of federal inspectors. Runways were resurfaced, jet bridges rechecked, and emergency protocols rewritten to address any gaps exposed by the incident. Airlines were required to submit updated maintenance records, while Boeing representatives worked closely with federal officials to assess the condition of every 737 in service. The reopening was celebrated, but the aviation industry had been permanently changed. New regulations required more frequent engine inspections, stricter quality control measures for aircraft manufacturers, and enhanced reporting requirements for any safety concerns. The cost of these measures would eventually be passed on to consumers through higher ticket prices. President Trump's decision to shut down LAX was ultimately vindicated when investigators discovered that 12 other aircraft worldwide had been flying with engines on the verge of similar failures. Emergency groundings prevented what could have been multiple catastrophic accidents, potentially saving hundreds of lives. Boeing faced a financial reckoning that dwarfed previous aviation scandals. The company agreed to pay over $5 billion in fines and compensation, while several executives faced criminal charges for their role in covering up the safety concerns. The scandal led to a complete reorganization of the company's safety culture and oversight procedures. For the passengers of Flight 1457, the experience left lasting trauma, but also gratitude for their survival. Captain Martinez and co-pilot Sarah Chen were hailed as heroes for their skilled handling of the emergency. Their quick thinking and professionalism under extreme pressure had prevented what could have been one of the deadliest aviation accidents in American history. The terrifying incident that nearly claimed 156 lives became a turning point for aviation safety worldwide. While President Trump's decision to shut down LAX created massive disruption, it ultimately prevented potentially dozens of similar catastrophic failures. What do you think? Was the economic chaos worth the lives potentially saved, or should authorities have taken a more measured approach? Share your thoughts in the comments below.